Welcome to the Deep Dive, the place where we sift through the most complex and fascinating sources so you can get straight to the aha moments. Today, we are taking on a source that has, well, arguably shaped the entire history of global mysticism, philosophy, and religion. The work of the monumental figure known as Ibn ʿArabi.
When we talk about figures who genuinely push the boundaries of what is considered thinkable, Ibn ʿArabi, he really stands alone. He's known in the tradition as the Shaykh al-Akbar, the Greatest Master.
The Greatest Master.
But that title, it only tells half the story. His thought is so radical that for 8 centuries, he has been simultaneously worshipped as the ultimate saint and condemned as a dangerous heretic.
That tension alone is exactly why we're diving in. Our mission today is to understand the heart of his most condensed, most dangerous, and I think most controversial work, Fusūs al-Ḥikam.
You'll hear it translated as the bezels of wisdom or sometimes the ringstones of wisdom.
It's a very short book, but it represents the absolute culmination of his doctrines.
It really does. The sources we've shared lay out the structural blueprint, the metaphysics, and most importantly, those specific unfiltered passages that reveal his grand, unified vision of existence. We are going to unpack how he expressed this startling idea of the unity of being, or Wahdat al-wujūd.
And how that one idea, that oneness, radically reinterpreted core concepts like faith, fate, and love for generations of thinkers across the globe.
It changed everything for them.
Okay, let's unpack this and jump right into the life that produced this masterpiece. Before we can even begin to tackle the philosophy, we have to understand the environment, the journey that forged a mind like this. So give us the quick, essential timeline of Ibn ʔarabi.
Okay, so he was born in Murcia, that's in eastern Andalusia, Spain, in 1165. He grew up mostly around Seville,
Which was the Almohad capital then, right?
Yeah.
A major center.
a huge cultural and intellectual capital. This meant he had access to this incredibly rich intellectual milieu, not just Islamic scholarship, but also, Greek philosophy and the mystical traditions that were just starting to blossom in the West. His early life was apparently filled with these intense mystical experiences, and he started writing very early.
But his intellectual life really opened up when he decided to leave Iberia. That must have been a huge decision for a scholar at that time.
It was, and he never went back. He left around the turn of the 13th century and began what would be really 2 decades of extensive travel across the East.
Wow.
He performed the Hajj in Mecca, which became a spiritual epicenter for him. It led to one of his most important literary projects. He stayed in Jerusalem, Baghdad, visited Konya, spent time in Cairo. These travels connected him with all the leading scholars, Sufis, and spiritual currents of the entire Islamic world.
So he was kind of a bridge. He brought the sophisticated intellectualism of Andalusia to the ancient spiritual centers of the East, and then vice versa, and he finally settled in Damascus.
Yes, he moved to Damascus late in his life, and he stayed there until his death in 1240. He was highly regarded as a teacher, even while his doctrines were, let's say, raising some eyebrows.
Yeah.
And during these decades of travel and teaching, he achieved an output that is, well, it's almost impossible to comprehend.
And when we say prolific, we need to stress the scale here. His full works are gargantuan, particularly his magnum opus, the Futuh al-Makkiyah.
The Meccan Revelations, it is just astonishing. It's this vast compendium of all the Islamic sciences, law, spirituality, cosmology, prophecy, spanning well over 10,000 manuscript pages.
10,000 pages.
It's an encyclopedia of his entire understanding of reality. To put that into perspective for you, it's roughly 20 times the length of the Bible.
That's incredible. And it is precisely against that colossal background that the brevity of the Fusūs al-Ḥikam becomes so significant. It's this short, dense little book, but it's the one that really defines his legacy.
It is the book. It represents his final, distilled, and often very radical doctrinal statement. It was composed relatively late in his life, around 1230. It's not a lengthy exploration. It's a highly concentrated jewel box of his philosophical and mystical truths.
And the circumstances of its creation, they elevate it beyond normal human authorship, making it immediately controversial.
That's right. In the introduction, he makes this incredibly powerful claim that he didn't write the book in the traditional sense. He says he had a vision.
A vision in which the Prophet Muhammad appeared to him.
Exactly. And physically handed him the book and commanded him to give it to the people unchanged.
That's a massive claim to make. It essentially places the text on a level of divine inspiration. It suggests that questioning the content is, in a way, questioning the Prophet's command.
He is the ultimate endorsement for his radical ideas. It basically says, this is not my opinion, this is revelation. And the way he chose to share this revealed text It speaks volumes about how he saw it, its difficulty, its intended audience.
You're talking about the Sama, right? The listening session tradition where scholars would publicly read their works.
Exactly. For the Fusūs, which was this giant work intended to teach the general Islamic sciences, the Sama involved a massive audience. We're talking hundreds of people from all walks of life, commoners, scholars, rulers. Everybody knew that work was for everyone.
But when it came to the Fusūs,
The records of that specific reading session are they're so telling. For the Fusūs al-Ḥikam, the source material confirms only one person was present.
one person.
His closest student and stepson, Adr al-Din al-Qunawi. This was a statement. This was not a book for public consumption. It was a text reserved for the most advanced, the most spiritually mature mystic who had already mastered all the prerequisites.
So he knew the explosive potential of these ideas, so he just gave them to the spiritual elite. But as we know, spiritual secrets rarely stay secret. Once these concepts, stripped of their usual poetic context, began circulating, the controversy just ignited.
And that's exactly why the Fusūs is considered so dangerous. It takes the veiled, nuanced ideas that are scattered throughout the 10,000 pages of the Fusūs, and it just lays them out as direct philosophical truths. It makes misunderstanding or intentional misrepresentation much, much easier.
The classic example of this is the tectonic shift in perception from someone like Ibn Taymiyyah, one of the most influential Hanbali theologians of the 14th century. He became a fierce opponent of the Shaykh al-Akbar.
This is such a fascinating biographical detail. Ibn Taymiyyah openly admitted that he initially admired Ibn ʿArabi. He'd read the Fusūs and appreciated his deep knowledge of Islamic law and spirituality. He saw him as a respected, if maybe a little eccentric, master.
But then he read the Fusūs.
But when he read the Fusūs al-Ḥikam, specifically those clear, direct declarations on the absolute oneness of being, he reversed his stance completely.
He went from being an admirer to accusing Ibn ʿArabi of outright heresy, believing the doctrines in the Fusūs compromise the transcendence of God. This one short book was the breaking point that fractured the whole theological consensus.
Yeah, the difference between the two works is the difference between a veiled hint and a shouted declaration. And Ibn Taymiyyah saw that declaration as a betrayal of orthodox monotheism.
But let's look at the book's physical structure for a moment, because it's a thematic journey. It's divided into 27 chapters.
And each chapter is called a fas, which means a ringstone or a bezel of wisdom. Each fas is named after and centered around a specific prophet from the Quran or the Bible. For example, the first chapter is on Adam, representing the ringstone of divine wisdom, and the final chapter focuses on Muhammad.
So he's using these prophetic figures not just as historical people, but as spiritual exemplars, each one embodying a specific aspect of divine wisdom.
Precisely. The chapter associated with that prophet uses his story, or a key moment from his life, to illustrate a core doctrinal point about how God manifests. And while it loosely follows a chronological order, starting with Adam, the order is philosophical, not historical.
What do you mean by that?
Well, for instance, Jesus and Solomon appear earlier in the sequence than David, which underscores that the arrangement is about the evolution of metaphysical ideas, not just a historical timeline.
Okay, now, here's the detail that, for anyone who appreciates the symbolic complexity of Ibn ʿArabi, is just baffling. The number 27, it feels incomplete.
It is a profound and, I think, intentional omission. Ibn ʿArabi was absolutely meticulous about numerical symbolism, especially the correspondences between numbers, letters, and the cosmos. And the number 28 was, for him, the number of cosmic and liturgical completion.
Why 28? Why was that number so universally significant in his worldview?
Well, there are 28 letters in the Arabic alphabet, and crucially, 28 mansions of the moon, which map the celestial spheres. This correspondence meant that 28 represented the complete unfolding of the cosmos and the complete articulation of language. We know he cared deeply about this.
We mentioned his Andalusian poetry suite earlier.
Yes, his suite of 28 songs, carefully structured, connecting to the 4 lines and 7 stanzas, totaling 28. It represents a completed, contained universe of thought and form. So given this, why would the Fusūs, his ultimate doctrinal statement, the book supposedly given to him by the prophet, stop at 27?
It leaves us with this great mystery, the missing 28th chapter.
It can't be an accident. We have to speculate on the profound intent behind that omission. The 27 chapters could represent the visible, manifest world, the 27 steps of God's self-disclosure.
So the missing 28th chapter.
It could very well represent the unseen essence of God, the hidden treasure that can never be fully contained or delimited or articulated in any book, even one delivered by the prophet.
It's a structural paradox. The book itself, by its very incomplete structure, teaches the ultimate lesson. The absolute real transcends even the most complete human articulation. It's telling the listener, you will find the final wisdom not on the page, but in the realm beyond.
It is perhaps the most eloquent silence in all of mystical literature. Now, let's move past the structure and into the actual substance, the metaphysical foundation that binds these 27 chapters together.
Right. The entire system rests on that foundational concept we mentioned earlier, Wahdat al-wujūd, the unity of being. At its most elemental level, we are talking about non-dualism. God is the sole reality.
That is the starting point. When Ibn ʿArabi proclaims there is no reality but the real, he means that existence wujud is itself singular, undifferentiated, and identical to God. Everything we perceive, the cosmos, time, space, you, me, is simply a manifestation, a modification, or a reflection of that one singular being.
Now, the critics, like Ibn Taymiyyah, they read that statement and they instantly saw crude pantheism. The idea that God is just equal to the sum of created objects, basically turning God into the universe itself. How does Ibn Arabi navigate that charge?
He avoids it by introducing profound nuance and paradox. He insists that God, al-Akbar, the real, is utterly transcendent, the apophatic God. Unknowable, indescribable, beyond all attributes. That is one pole.
Okay.
But at the same time, this same real is the very substance and reality of the world, the cataphatic God.
So God is simultaneously not the world, and yet the only thing that gives the world its existence.
Exactly. The cosmos is summarized in our sources as the unfolding of possibilities inherent in infinite actuality. The world is not something other than God, but is God's infinite attributes manifesting in finite forms. That famous Quranic verse then becomes literal. Whichever way you turn, there is the face of God.
So let's follow the logic of creation, starting with the core impulse, that hadith Qudsi of the hidden treasure.
Ah, yes. The hadith states, I was a hidden treasure, and I loved to be known, so I created the world that I might be known. This is the engine of reality. The hidden treasure is God's absolute simple essence, the that is beyond all knowledge. It is utterly unknowable, pure potential.
The love to be known, then, is the divine impulse to move from potential to actuality.
Yes. This love triggers what he calls the first identification, where the simple essence turns its gaze upon itself and realizes the infinity of its own nature, all the innumerable names and attributes it potentially possesses. Creator, merciful, just, powerful, and so on. This self-knowledge introduces the necessary initial duality, the knower and the known.
So creation isn't about filling a vacuum or responding to some external need. It's an act of divine self-realization.
It is God creating the cosmos, that which we call other than God, as a mirror, a way to be known to himself but through another. The world is the infinite manifestation of those attributes, necessary for God to functionally be the creator, the merciful, the provider.
To make this relationship clear, Ibn Arabi uses that beautiful and complex metaphor of the mirror. We should spend some time on this, as it is just central to understanding the veil of existence.
The mirror metaphor is probably the best conceptual tool he gives us. Imagine God's essence wujud as the highly polished, unseen surface of the mirror. It's the underlying reality, but it's totally inaccessible to direct view.
Okay, so it's the substance of the mirror itself.
Right, and the cosmos, the created world, is simply the image, the reflection, that's cast upon that surface. These images are limited, qualified manifestations of God's names.
Which means when we look at the world, we are looking at God, but only in a qualified, reflected form.
Crucially, yes. And here is the paradox he emphasizes. The reflections are so vibrant, so compelling that they become the veil. The sheer presence of the image, the world, prevents us from seeing the mirror's surface, God's essence, directly. He states profoundly, when you see a form in a mirror, struggle within yourself to see the body of the mirror. You will, without any doubt, never see it.
So the world is the necessary medium for God's self-expression, but that very medium is the barrier to seeing his unreflected reality. He veils himself with himself.
Precisely. We are blinded by the beauty and the compelling nature of the reflection. And this brings us to the mechanism by which this infinite, singular existence takes on infinite particular shapes. The ayan al-tabita, the immutable entities.
Okay, this is a complex philosophical term that we need to carefully unpack for our listeners. What are these entities introduced in the chapter of Seth?
You can think of the ayan al-tabita as the eternal fixed blueprints, or maybe the determined potential forms existing only as objects of knowledge within God's mind. They are the infinite ways the divine attributes can be qualified, the archetypes for every possible created thing. Think of them like the software code that God knows intimately.
But they are non-existent in themselves. They're pure potential.
Yes, they are determined by God's knowledge, but they possess no wujud, no existence on their own. They are the non-beings that wait to be actualized. When God decides to create, He doesn't create new existence because existence is always one and always God. He simply lends or pours existence into these blueprints.
Let's use that water and vessel analogy again, but this time let's explore the implication for destiny and fate.
Sure, if wujud is the water singular, unified, and identical to God, then the ayan al-thabita are the receptacles or the vessels. God pours the water, existence, into the vessel, the fixed archetype, and the water takes the shape of the vessel. The existence is one, but the manifestations are varied.
So the shape of the vessel, the blueprint, is what determines the ultimate destiny and attributes of the created thing.
Absolutely. The vessel determines the limits, the potential, and the manifestation of that existence. Crucially, the vessel never possesses being of its own. It serves only as a localized form for God's being to display itself. If you are born as a specific person, it is because your immutable entity, your eternal archetype in God's mind, predetermined those specific limitations and possibilities. This is really the heart of his understanding of fate.
This whole unified system naturally points to the highest possible reflection of this oneness, which is the role of the human being, the insan kamil.
Yes, the human being is the microcosm. That's the subject of the opening chapter on Adam. The cosmos reflects all of God's attributes, but in a scattered, spread-out way. The human being, however, is created in a way that allows them, in potential, to reflect all attributes in a single, comprehensive, and unified form.
The human being is the summary of the universe.
The insan kamil, the complete human being, is the comprehensive mirror that comprises the whole affair. They are the ultimate locus of God's self-knowledge. God created the cosmos as a mirror, and then polished one specific part of that reflection, humanity, to be the perfect, comprehensive reflection through which he could see his entirety.
It sets the stakes incredibly high for human potential. We are, in a way, the ultimate purpose of creation. So we've established that the intellectual difficulty of Ibn Arabi's system lies in simultaneously affirming two seemingly contradictory truths. God is completely unlike the world, and God is the reality of the world. This is that balance between Tanazu and Tashbih.
This intellectual balance is completely non-negotiable for Ibn Arabi. Tanzu is transcendence, the view that God is separate, utterly other, pure, and exalted beyond the universe. This is the view of rational theology, the eye of reason.
And Tashbih is immanence, the view that God is similar to the world, actively involved, present in the details, and the world is his direct self-disclosure. This is the view of the eye of intuition.
And if you follow only Tanazu, you end up with a distant, cold, philosophical God who has no connection to your life. If you follow only Tashbih, you risk anthropomorphism, reducing God to just a large, human or crude pantheism. Ibn Arabi insists both views are simultaneously true and false.
He illustrates the error of this imbalance perfectly in the chapter of Noah.
Right. Noah, in the narrative, he struggled to convince his people. Ibn Arabi's esoteric reading suggests Noah failed because he emphasized Tanazu's separation too strongly. He focused on God's remoteness and separation from the people. He failed to balance this with Quran, which Ibn Arabi interprets here as binding together or connection.
He pushed God's difference so hard that he actually severed the connection necessary for his message to land. So who achieved the perfect synthesis?
The Prophet Muhammad.
Yeah.
He mastered the simultaneous assertion of both truth. The sources highlight that single verse. Not is there like unto his likeness. Think about the rhetorical genius of that. The first half, not is there like unto his likeness, affirms absolute negation and transcendence.
Right.
But the second half, by referring to a likeness, subtly affirms a necessary immanence or similarity.
It's linguistic mastery. The phrase negates God having a likeness, but it affirms the existence of a concept of likeness, therefore holding the tension perfectly. It prevents the mind from simplifying the equation.
And while the philosophical goal is balance, the Fusūs leans heavily into affirming the immanence perspective, often in startling ways, which is why it earned its controversial reputation.
Tell us about the radicality of immanence in the chapter of Hid.
It contains some of his most non-dualistic declarations. Look at this quote we've studied. By virtue of existence, he is identical with existent things. Those things we call that which comes to be are exalted in their essence and are none other than he.
That is a bold, almost frightening statement for a traditional theologian. If God is identical with existing things, doesn't that make the worship of existence itself a form of idolatry? How does he logically defend such a complete erasure of distinction?
This is the core philosophical defense he offers. It's about the nature of absolute limitlessness. If God is truly absolute and unlimited, you cannot place a restriction on him. To say God is unlimited, but he cannot express himself in limited finite form, is actually to impose a massive limit on the unlimited God.
That's a fascinating inversion. Imposing a limitation on God is the only thing the absolute God is paradoxically unable to accept.
Exactly. Therefore, God must be capable of delimiting himself and expressing himself as identical with things in some way to maintain his absolute nature. The absolute must encompass everything, including the finite and delimited things. Everything that exists is a limit of the real, and God flows through all of it.
This radical affirmation of the world's reality stands in stark opposition to traditions that view matter as inherently evil or reality as some kind of cosmic mistake, the Gnostic tendency.
This is a crucial area where Ibn ʿArabi distances himself from many other mystics. He argues that multiplicity is not an illusion to be escaped. It's essential because it's the only way for the infinite divine attributes to be seen.
And he makes a clear distinction between the concept of dunya and alam.
Right. Dunya is worldliness, the human tendency toward ego-driven desires, greed, attachment, lust. This is what must be struggled against. But ulam is the world, the cosmos itself, which is a noble, beautiful, and divine manifestation. Rejecting the world is rejecting God's manifestation.
The sources mention that anecdote about the black crow to emphasize the nobility of the material world.
Yeah, in his work Al-Tadbira al-Ilahiyya, the black crow is used to symbolize the material physical world, the universal body. And those who despise the crow or reject its nobility are shown to be spiritually immature. The material world is a vital part of the divine display. It is the locus of witnessing. If you reject the matter, you reject the only means of witnessing the real.
That gives a profound dignity to the physical and material existence we all inhabit. Let's look at how this unified reality translates into relationships, specifically in the chapter of Abraham, where he explores this idea of reciprocal dependence.
Right, Abraham is the friend of God. Khalil Allah. The relationship is reciprocal. We are obviously dependent on God for our existence. But Ibn ʿArabi argues that God is also dependent on creation, not on the level of his essence, but on the level of his names.
Okay, that is a staggering theological claim. How can the absolute real, the self-sufficient one, be dependent on anything created? That sounds like a fundamental compromise of his sovereignty.
That is precisely the tension he embraces, but he resolves it by clearly distinguishing between the essence and the names. God's essence is eternally independent, unchanged, self-sufficient, but his names and attributes are relational.
Give us an example of that relational dependency.
Okay, consider the name the Creator. That name has no meaning or function unless there is something created. God is only functionally the Creator because the cosmos exists. Likewise, God is the Merciful, but that name remains dormant unless there is something over which mercy can be extended. Creation provides the locus for the names to be manifest and for their function to be carried out. The dependence is functional and relational, not existential.
So, creation is the stage where God's potential attributes become active realities. It makes the world less of an afterthought and more of a necessary partner in the divine unfolding.
A necessary partner for the full, complete revelation of the divine identity.
If the underlying engine of reality is God's self-expression, then the force driving that engine has to be love, and specifically Rama, or mercy.
Rama is the absolute primary attribute of God. Ibn ʿArabi equates the giving of existence itself with the giving of mercy. The creation of the world is synonymous with the outpouring of mercy.
I think we need to linger on the depth of that Arabic word, Rama. In English, mercy often implies, forgiveness overriding justice, as in a judgment.
Exactly. It's often seen as a legalistic concession. But the root of Rama is the same as the root for womb. This infuses the concept with connotations of generative, protective, motherly love, and profound, nurturing kindness. It is the force that cares for all of creation. He insists that God's mercy overrides his wrath, not just in individual instances, but as a cosmic principle. The very breath of the all-merciful is the existential action of the real. The universe is literally made of this compassionate kindness.
Okay, if mercy is the primary existential principle, it forces a radical reinterpretation of divine judgment, specifically the punishment of sinners in the afterlife.
And this leads to one of the most explosive claims in the Fusūs. While sinners will remain in hell for eternity, the suffering they experience will be temporary. The ultimate destiny of all souls is a return to the encompassing love that defines existence.
That just challenges the fundamental doctrine of eternal damnation found in so many traditional theological systems. How does he justify the end of suffering while maintaining eternal presence in the fire?
He uses a nuanced theological and linguistic argument. The theological argument is that God must fulfill his promises, like reward in paradise, but he is not bound to follow through on his threats, like punishment in hell. Mercy is primary and absolute.
And the linguistic argument, connecting punishment and sweetness.
Yes, the word for punishment in Arabic is adab. Ibn ʿArabi connects this to the root of the word adhab, which means sweet water or sweetness. He argues that eventually the souls in the fire will undergo a spiritual transformation. Once the soul recognizes that hell itself is a necessary self-disclosure of God and part of the real, a required reflection of certain divine names, the suffering will lift. The eternal fire remains, but their perception of it transforms from pain to a form of pleasure or sweetness that conforms to the nature of the encompassing mercy.
So the destination doesn't change, but the existential experience of that destination transforms completely upon spiritual realization. That maintains consistency with the primary nature of the divine.
It creates a beautiful, unified theological picture where even punishment ultimately serves the higher purpose of universal love. And this concept of love is the engine behind all action, which he explores in the chapter of Moses.
What does he mean by the universal motion of love?
He argues that love is the essence of every reality and every action, whether we recognize it or not. Every motion, every movement, every conscious choice, and every unconscious process is rooted in a fundamental love for self-preservation, self-realization, or attraction toward perfection.
Even seemingly negative emotions like fear or hate.
Absolutely. Take the example of Moses fleeing Pharaoh. Outwardly, he fled out of fear for his life. Ibn ʿArabi insists that inwardly, this fear is nothing other than a drive rooted in love, the love to preserve the self. Fear in this system is merely the shadow of love, a reaction to the potential loss of something beloved. Hate is simply the result of loving something that the object of hate offends.
So all motion, physical or spiritual, is fundamentally an act of attraction.
He summarizes this doctrine by saying, motion is always the motion of love. There is no motion in being that is not that of love. If a rock falls, it is moving out of love toward its natural center. If a person seeks knowledge, they move out of love for perfection.
This chapter in Moses, however, contains the point that truly infuriated critics like Ibn Taymiyyah even more than the temporary nature of hell suffering, the doctrine of Pharaoh's faith.
This is truly the theological flashpoint of the Fusūs. The traditional interpretation holds that Pharaoh's repentance, uttered while he was drowning in the Red Sea, was invalid because it was made as the moment of absolute certainty of death, an act of desperation, not genuine faith.
But Ibn Arabi defends it. That seems impossible to reconcile with the narrative.
He mounts a very detailed, subtle, almost legalistic defense. He argues that Pharaoh was not entirely certain he was dying at the moment he made his declaration. Why? Because Pharaoh had just witnessed the dry path the Israelites walked on, and he might have held out the slender hope that God would provide a similar path for him.
So, because a sliver of doubt, however tiny, might have existed in that moment, the belief was considered valid by the divine.
Correct. The implication is that God saved Pharaoh from the punishment of the hereafter in his soul. Furthermore, Ibn Arabi goes on to suggest a truly radical interpretation of Pharaoh's character, suggesting he was an underlying Gnostic who knew the truth about God and reality the whole time, but deliberately hid it for the sake of his own sovereignty and worldly gain.
That changes the entire nature of the narrative, painting the ultimate villain as a kind of perverse spiritual master who deliberately cloaked the truth.
It's a remarkable piece of theological gymnastics, but it serves a crucial purpose: maintaining the perfect, encompassing consistency of the doctrine of Rahmah. Even the soul of the greatest oppressor must eventually be brought back into the fold of divine mercy, because mercy is the core of existence.
The ultimate implication of God manifesting in infinite ways through infinite immutable entities is that reality must contain an infinity of correct perspectives. This leads directly to Ibn Arabi's view on religious pluralism, summarized in this concept of the divinity of beliefs.
This is one of his most widely quoted and universally relevant statements. He issues a direct warning to the spiritual seeker. Beware lest you bind yourself with a specific belief and reject others, for much good will escape you. God is too vast and too great to be confined to one belief to the exclusion of another.
Now, this sounds like a pure call for religious pluralism, but the sources remind us he was still a deeply committed Muslim who adhered to the primacy of the Prophet's law. How does he reconcile the truth of all beliefs with the primacy of one?
It is fundamentally a metaphysical statement, not a socio-political one. He goes back to that water and cup analogy, borrowing from the earlier Sufi master Junaid of Baghdad. The water takes on the color of the cup. God is the infinite pure water. He discloses himself to people based on their innate preparedness, which is determined by their unique ayan al-tabita, their vessel.
So because every person is a unique, limited vessel, they must necessarily conceive of God in a unique, limited way.
Exactly. Everyone creates their own God in their soul that they worship, a localized manifestation that fits their spiritual capacity. He says the divinity of beliefs comes about through this making. They see not but their own souls and what they have made therein. Since everything is a manifestation of the real, all these divinities are metaphysically true. You cannot worship anything but God.
You cannot miss the target. You can only limit your view of the target.
That's the perfect summation. Since God flows through all created things, the object of worship is always God. But this raises the critical question of spiritual conduct. If all beliefs are metaphysically true, how do we evaluate them?
This is where the concept of adab, or proper manners, comes into the equation.
All beliefs about God are metaphysically correct, but they are all simultaneously incorrect because God transcends all belief systems. For instance, to worship a physical rock is metaphysically true. The rock is a manifestation of God in that limited form. But it is bad manners, bad adab, toward the divine, because God explicitly forbade the worship of images in the revealed law of Islam.
So the revealed law is the path of correct spiritual conduct, designed to show the greatest respect toward the real, even while affirming that the real is everywhere.
It beautifully resolves the tension. And the greatest capacity to embrace all these views without being limited by anyone resides in the spiritual center of the human being, the heart, or qalb, which is the focus of the chapter of Shu'aib.
The word qalb itself suggests constant motion.
It literally means turning or fluctuating.
Yeah.
The human heart is never static. It is always in motion, shaped by what it encompasses. And this heart is unique in all of creation. It's the only vessel that is boundless enough to contain the infinite God.
We see that in that famous hadith. Neither my earth nor my heavens could contain me, but the heart of my believing servant does contain me.
The heart of the realized Gnostic, the arif, becomes the comprehensive mirror, capable of containing all the infinite manifestations without being limited by anyone. The heart of this Gnostic must become hala.
The Gnostic becoming hala, that's the Aristotelian concept of pure receptive matter. Why is that the goal?
Because hala is the pure passive receptacle. It receives and takes on all forms without being defined by any single one. The Gnostic's heart must achieve this state of pure receptivity. It cannot be limited by a Christian God, a Jewish God, a Muslim God, or a philosophical God. It must be pure matter, ready to take the form of all beliefs, encompassing the real absolutely.
That sets the stage for the ultimate spiritual achievement, which moves beyond fana, the annihilation of the ego.
Fana is the necessary first step in Sufism. The annihilation of the ego, the realization of oneness behind the veil, where the seeker loses himself in God. But Ibn ʿArabi argues that this is incomplete. You must realize oneness, and then you must return.
The ultimate stage is baqwa, subsisting in God.
Yes, baqa means subsisting in God while returning to individuality and multiplicity. The ultimate goal is not to stay behind the veil in undifferentiated unity, but to come back and see God in the veil itself, a oneness that affirms and embraces all of multiplicity. You return to the world to practice adab toward a world that you now know is entirely composed of the real.
And this journey culminates in the most radical expression of baqa and the affirmation of multiplicity found in the final chapter dedicated to the Prophet Muhammad.
The final chapter is about the three things the Prophet loved: prayer, perfume representing the gentle, merciful breath of God and women. And Ibn ʿArabi dedicates a tremendous amount of space to the third beloved thing, interpreting it not aesthetically but metaphysically.
He connects it to the ultimate perfection of witnessing the divine.
It traces back to his cosmology of active and passive cosmic principles. The active principle, masculine like the intellect or heaven, unites with the passive principle, feminine like the world soul or earth. Their union is the creative act. The human sexual act is the physical manifestation of the union of the lover and the divine beloved, where the active and passive principles become momentarily unified.
But why is witnessing God in woman the most perfect manifestation that seems to elevate the feminine locus above all others?
It does. It's because the essence of God requires a physical manifest locus matter for true witnessing to occur. The human male, in this context, witnesses the real in the woman as a passive, receiving, reflecting thing. And he witnesses the real in himself in relation to the woman as the active, initiating thing.
So the union encompasses both the active principle and the passive principle simultaneously.
It is the unification of the seer, the active, and the matter, the passive, in one holistic, intimate experience. Because it unites both sides of the cosmic equation in a single locus, the conclusion is absolute. Witnessing the real in women is the greatest and most perfect witnessing.
That is an incredibly powerful, climactic statement that completely reverses any ascetic tendency to dismiss the material world or the feminine principle. For Ibn ʿArabi, the greatest spiritual realization occurs right here, in the union of human beings.
It's clear that Ibn Arabi constructed this challenging but perfectly coherent metaphysical system. Every major doctrine, the oneness of being, Wujud, the primacy of mercy, Rama, the necessity of the infinite heart, Qalbi, all flows directly into the next, culminating in the complete affirmation of reality through Buqā.
His legacy is just undeniable. Whether he is praised as the greatest master or condemned as a heretic, the Fusūs forced thinkers to confront the limits of language and logic when describing the absolute. The book has generated this massive body of commentaries, from figures like Abd al-Rahman Jami in Persia to Abd al-Qadir al-Jazairi in North Africa, confirming its status as a foundational text of global mystical literature.
Yet, the caution remains. Sufi masters historically forbade students from reading this text until they had achieved a very advanced spiritual attainment. It is simply too easy to read statements like, God is identical with existent things, and misunderstand it as a license for, crude license or philosophical anarchy, rather than the profound and non-dual affirmation that requires the purity of the Gnostic heart to correctly interpret.
So what does this highly advanced paradoxical metaphysics mean for you, the listener, in your daily life? We've discussed how Ibn Arabi viewed God as both the praiser and the praised in a single act.
Yes, his esoteric reading of the phrase, Alhamdulillah, praise belongs to God, is a final piece of the puzzle. Outwardly, when we utter this, we direct the praise at God, the transcendent object of worship.
But inwardly, recognizing that we are the vessel through which the divine existence is lent, and that we are God knowing himself through another, the praise is God.
God is both the praiser and the praised in a single, continuous, circulating act of reality.
So if every act of gratitude you perform, every moment of true love you feel, and every bit of existence you perceive is ultimately this single entity revealing itself through you, then what does that mean for the mundane moments of your day? Are we not, in every breath, every thought, and every action, God praising himself through the very form he lent us? That's something to mull over until our next deep dive.